trends are already in motion that will completely reshape civilization over the next 20 years. And the people who understand them now will have a serious advantage over everyone who doesn't. This video breaks down each one, where it comes from, and what it means for your life. If you're learning something here, please hit subscribe. You'll get notified every time I post, and you'll be part of something that genuinely matters to me. Let's get into the video. For 3 decades, the entire world operated on a single assumption. America runs things. American military power kept the peace. The American dollar kept trade flowing. American design institutions like the UN, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization gave that power a friendly face. So most people never noticed it was an empire at all. Francis Fukuyama called this moment the end of history, and he meant it literally. Liberal capitalist democracy had won, and now humanity would simply enjoy its victory indefinitely. That turned out to be wrong. What's collapsing now isn't American strength. America remains an extraordinarily wealthy and capable country. What's collapsing is the restraint and the discipline that made the system work. Because the second generation always carries more arrogance than wisdom. And America is now bombing countries without consulting anyone, ignoring the very rules it spent decades building. And when the rule maker starts breaking its own rules, the rules stop meaning anything. The unipolar moment is finished. And every system built on top of it, global trade, international law, affordable travel, the open internet, is now genuinely fragile. Here's something hiding in plain sight. Every single thing in the modern world runs on petroleum. Not some things, everything. The food on your plate grew with fertilizers derived from oil. The medicine you take comes from petroleum-based compounds. Your clothing, your phone, the airplane that carries you across an ocean, the data center running your bank, all of it traces back to cheap fossil fuel. The entire architecture of modern civilization got built on that foundation. What happens when conflict disrupts Middle Eastern oil supply and cuts off the trade routes delivering that oil to China, India, and Southeast Asia? The global economy doesn't just slow down. It breaks apart in ways that most governments haven't seriously planned for. A civilization built on the assumption of cheap, abundant energy is now watching that assumption get tested, and the societies that figure out how to function without it will come through intact. The ones that don't will face a correction unlike anything in living memory. 8 billion people currently live on this planet, and most of them depend on global trade networks, delivering food grown far away using fertilizers made from petroleum shipped through sea lanes that require stable international order to stay open. Pull any one of those threads and the whole system gets tighter. Overlay a map of food insecurity with a map of water scarcity. Then add which of those same countries have the least political accountability. And what you get is a map of where famines, revolutions, and wars will erupt over the next 2 decades. China currently imports a quarter of its food and around 75% of its oil. That's not a comfortable position for the world's most populous nation. India's megacities sit in some of the most water-stressed regions on Earth. Across Africa and the Middle East, millions of people are already on the edge of what the current system can support. Any national leader who isn't treating food and water security as the top priority right now is simply not paying attention. When food runs out and water runs out and governments collapse, people move. That's the oldest pattern in human history, and it's accelerating right now. People from sub-Saharan Africa crossing the Mediterranean, people from Central America moving into the United States. These aren't isolated incidents driven by individual desperation. These are early signals of a wave that could grow a 100 times larger as resource pressures intensify across the global south. And here's where it gets genuinely complicated because Europe is aging fast, America is aging fast, and both desperately need young workers to keep their economies running. That need points directly toward immigration. By bringing in millions of people quickly from very different cultural backgrounds into societies whose older populations already feel economically squeezed and culturally uncertain produces something dangerous. Civil conflict at home erupting at the same moment. Chaos spreads abroad. No government has a clean answer to this. Anyone claiming otherwise is selling something. Seamless global trade. The kind where any product can move from any country to any other country with minimal friction, took about 30 years to build and may take far less time to unwind. What replaces? It looks a lot like the 16th and 17th centuries when the British, Portuguese, French, and Spanish empires each controlled their own trade networks, competed fiercely with each other, and rarely cooperated on anything significant. That world is coming back. The world is no longer moving toward a single, unified system. It is fragmenting quietly at first, but now unmistakably into competing spheres of power. An American sphere, a Chinese sphere, a shifting and uneasy arrangement between Russia and Europe. Meanwhile, the Gulf states are extending their influence deep into Africa and Central Asia, building networks that serve their own long-term interests. What emerges is not the end of global trade, but its transformation. Trade becomes slower, more expensive, and far more political. Efficiency, the defining principle of the last 30 years, fades into the background. In its place, resilience becomes the priority. Nations will no longer ask, what is cheapest? But rather, what can we rely on when the system breaks? At the same time, a quieter but equally powerful force is shaping the future from within: demographics. Across nearly every wealthy nation, the same reality holds. Older generations, particularly the baby boomers, still control the majority of wealth, political institutions, and decision-making power. And unlike previous eras, modern medicine is extending their influence far beyond what history would consider normal. Many will live well into their 80s and 90s, even approaching 100. That means the systems of today may remain in the hands of those shaped by the past for another 2 decades. Meanwhile, the generations that will actually live in the future being constructed right now hold comparatively little power and far less wealth. Historically, this imbalance resolved itself naturally. The old stepped aside and the young took over. That mechanism is now delayed, distorted, and in some places breaking entirely. The critical question becomes, which societies can transfer power across generations peacefully, and which will only do so through disruption? Japan stands out as a revealing case. Its demographic crisis is among the most severe in the world, forcing it to confront these challenges earlier and more directly than others. But Japan also possesses a cultural foundation rooted in collective responsibility and long-term thinking traits that may allow it to navigate this transition with less instability. For much of the rest of the developed world, however, the path forward is far less clear. The longer this generational handover is postponed, the greater the tension becomes, and when it finally resolves, it is unlikely to do so cleanly. At the same time, another pillar of the modern world is undergoing its own transformation: the structure of knowledge itself. During the unipolar era, science rose to a position of near unquestioned authority. And while science as a method remains one of humanity's greatest achievements, The institutions built around it have, in many cases, become rigid. Like all systems that accumulate power, they develop internal incentives, status hierarchies, gatekeeping mechanisms, and unspoken rules about what can and cannot be questioned. The risk is not that science fails, but that it becomes constrained by its own structures. When inquiry gives way to orthodoxy, progress slows. Over the past few decades, much of what has been presented as innovation has been the scaling and refinement of existing ideas rather than truly disruptive breakthroughs. The nations and systems that find ways to encourage unconventional thinking while still maintaining rigor will hold a decisive advantage in the years ahead. Beneath all of this lies a deeper cultural shift. The unipolar world promoted a powerful idea that the individual is the central unit of meaning. Personal success, personal freedom, personal identity, these became the dominant values. And in many ways, this philosophy generated extraordinary prosperity and innovation. But it also produced a form of fragility that only becomes visible under stress. Because when real crises emerge, when food systems falter, when security weakens, when institutions lose legitimacy, individualism alone is not enough. No one rebuilds a broken system alone. No one sustains a community, protects a neighborhood, or raises the next generation in isolation. The societies that endure the coming decades will not be the ones that perfected individual success, but the ones that rediscover collective strength through family, through community, and through shared obligation that exists not as a slogan, but as a daily reality. And when material systems begin to strain, something else returns, something deeply human and historically consistent. When people can no longer find meaning in economic progress or institutional trust, they begin to look elsewhere. Religion, in its many forms, has always filled that space, not simply as belief, but as identity, structure, and purpose. This is already beginning to re-emerge. In parts of the United States, there are signs of renewed Christian engagement. Across the Middle East and Africa, Islam continues to provide a strong and resilient social foundation. Even in places that once appeared fully secular, quieter forms of spiritual searching are taking root. This matters because societies are not held together by economics alone. When hardship comes, shared belief, something that transcends material conditions, can determine whether a society fragments or holds. This raises a particularly important tension in regions like East Asia, where countries such as Japan, China, and South Korea have some of the lowest levels of religious affiliation in the world. At the same time, they face some of the most severe demographic and resource challenges. That combination material pressure without a unifying spiritual framework creates a form of vulnerability that deserves close attention. As these pressures build, governments everywhere will face the same fundamental dilemma: how to maintain stability while having less to offer. There are two broad paths forward. One relies on transparency, shared sacrifice, and genuine accountability, an approach that requires trust between governments and citizens. The other path is more controlled, more technological, and already emerging in various forms. Surveillance systems powered by artificial intelligence, algorithmic control over information, digital currencies that can be monitored and restricted, and social systems that reward compliance while penalizing dissent. The second path does not need to be imagined. It is already being built. And if taken to its extreme, it leads to a world where power becomes increasingly concentrated and freedom becomes unevenly distributed. The most stark version of that future is not one of total collapse, but of division, A small group at the top with significant autonomy and influence, and a much larger population whose lives are increasingly managed, monitored, and constrained. That outcome is not guaranteed, but it is possible. And the deciding factor will not simply be governments or technologies, but the awareness of the people living within those systems. A population that understands what is being built around it has the capacity to shape it. A population that does not adapts to it without realizing what has been lost. Taken together, these trends form a coherent picture of the world ahead. The gradual decline of a single dominant global power. The end of an era defined by cheap and abundant energy. Increasing competition over food and water resources. Large-scale migration driven by necessity rather than choice. The reorganization of global trade into competing regional blocs. A growing tension between generations over power and resources. The risk of intellectual stagnation within powerful institutions. A cultural shift away from radical individualism toward collective survival. The reemergence of religion and shared belief as stabilizing forces, and the quiet but accelerating development of technologically enabled systems of control. None of these trends require speculation. They are already visible, already unfolding, already shaping decisions at the highest levels and consequences at the most personal ones. The assumption that things will return to how they were, that stability will simply reassert itself once current conflicts pass, is increasingly difficult to sustain. The direction of change is not temporary. It is structural. The future, then, does not belong to those who predict it perfectly, but to those who recognize it early and adapt accordingly. That means developing skills that remain valuable in uncertain conditions. It means building real relationships with people who can be relied upon when systems fail. It means understanding where essential resources come from and how dependent you are on systems you do not control. And perhaps most importantly, it means being clear about what you believe and what you stand for beyond material success or temporary comfort. Because the defining advantage in the years ahead will not be intelligence alone, or wealth alone, or even power alone. It will be clarity, the ability to see the world as it is without illusion, and to act within it with intention. And in a time of accelerating change, that clarity may be the most valuable asset of all.